actually the first guest I had on the podcast was this gentleman named Brian Muraresku.
He's a dear friend of mine.
Okay, so
and we're collaborating with each other.
Interesting.
We are actually working together on the psychedelic problem and looking at exploring. And you can imagine, for very obvious reasons, of the things we've been talking about all coincide within this. And he and I are working on joint proposals together, and through Harvard and through WITS and through others. So we're in close contact. I think I have a call with him this week.
Can you sort of summarize what that line of thinking is and what you're looking for?
Well, I mean, he and I, I've discovered a species that may be experimenting with this sort of concepts of introspection and past, which have opened up the idea of opening up sort of previously forbidden questions, if you will, and studies like his of looking at the way that mind-altering substances and that may have affected our the very way we think, language, and all the things may have very direct test of the idea of us and other species developing these things. And the beauty is that we've reached a point where it's no longer mad science. It's some of the most testable science that we can do. We can use mass spectrometers and other methods to actually test whether these animals and humans and others are using substances, what they're eating, what they're ingesting in the past. And we've reached a stage where it's not fringe science anymore. It's some of the central testable science that we can pursue. And when you're looking at the ideas of the exploration of the development of the mind in us and other species, well, we're naturally magnetized to each other.
Yeah, I mean, I was fascinated by Brian's book and some of the archaeochemical and botanical evidence that he explored about, humans thousands of years ago using things like ergotized rye and other things, and using their knowledge of botany to intentionally ingest things for reasons that probably had to do with ritual ceremonies and religious practice.
Well, and let me carry that thought a little further. People often don't think about, you asked earlier, I think you asked something like what makes us human, or how do you identify a human? And one of the interesting things which Brian and I talk about a lot that we people often don't think of is what actually does identify as humans. If it's not a big brain, if it's not this morphology, if it's not the toolkit, because we now know lots of animals do that, very complex. What is it? What are the universals that are amongst modern humans? Well, one is ritual practices related to death. That is a universal. As far as I'm aware, there's never been a modern human species, or in the historical records or within archaeological records, that they don't practice some form of ritual behaviors related to death and drug use, mind-altering substances. Amongst all animals that we're aware of so far, humans are the only ones that universally across all cultures utilize mind-altering substances. Some animals do so, but they tend to do it in populations or isolation in groups, but it's not universal to species. Humans do it, as far as we're aware, as far as I'm aware, universally. Isn't that interesting? So what if those are some of the part of the definition of being human? We're a living pharmacist and scientist, as well as a living spiritualist in that. And what if that has occurred in other species? And what if that's part of the thing that makes us?
So, for something like Homo naledi, something living, hundreds of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of years ago, or even older, what would evidence for ingestion of, say, a psychoactive plant or fungus look like? What kind of evidence might you find?
Therein lies the reason for having think tanks and groups. No one's ever asked that question before. And we're now asking that question. And we'll let you know.
My understanding is that there are methods being developed that have to do with teeth and teeth anatomy, and bits of food and things that creatures were munching on can kind of get trapped and preserved inside the tooth. Is that
my
something that happens?
My teams have published in Nature on that at Sediba at 2 million years.
Interesting. What kinds of things do you find with a creature that old?
A decade ago, it was phytoliths, parts of plants, the rigid parts of plants that used to hold them up, and other parts you can find pollen, you can find other areas. Now we're looking at molecular biology and that, and I don't know what the limits of that are.
Interesting. So it is within the realm of possibility that we might get answers to the questions that we thought were almost not even askable questions not that long ago.
I think it's within the realm of science.